Okay, everybody. Well, we have officially made it after I think it was multiple years. Even back when, um, at the time, Pastor Stephen Bozeman, now a now a lay Orthodox uh, man, was with us at Transcendent Truth Media all the way back then, years and years ago. Not millions of years, but definitely a couple. That we started this series, and today we finish it. The conclusion of the Augsburg Confession. Here we are. I'm not even going to bother sharing my screen because the text we're working with it's so fundamentally small. I think you're going to get the idea. Now, the conclusion, I'll just read it to you and then we're just going to talk about what we've seen through these last few years. He says, "These are the chief articles that are regarded as controversial." Remember, this is the second conclusion. We already had one for the articles of faith. For though there are many more abuses and errors that could have been added, we listed only the principal ones in order to avoid prolixity and undue length. The others can easily be addressed in the light of these same ones. In the past, there were many complaints about indulgences, pilgrimages, the misuse of the ban, that is excommunication, and moreover, pastors had endless quarrels with monks about hearing confession and funerals and sermons on special occasions and countless other matters. All this we passed over, being as considerate as we could, so that the chief points of the issue may be discerned. Moreover, it must not be thought that anything has been said or introduced out of hatred or effrontery. On the contrary, we have listed only matters that we thought needed to be brought up and reported on. That is, matters of first importance, you could say, for the sake of the consciences of the people. We did this in order to make it clear that among us concerning doctrine, there is nothing in doctrine or ceremonies that has been accepted that would contradict either Scripture or the Catholic Church. For it is manifest and obvious that we have been very diligent and with God's help to speak without boasting prevented any new and godless teaching from insinuating itself into our churches, spreading, and finally giving the upper hand. In keeping with summons, we have desired to present the articles above as a declaration of our confession and the teaching of our people. Anyone who should find it defective shall willingly be furnished with an additional account based on divine Holy Scripture. So, what have we seen here? Just in this conclusion alone is the essence of the entirety of the confession. Just as with the first conclusion, and this is why this conclusion is going to be so short. In a sense, we've already had a conclusion. Remember, I believe that was titled, "Are Lutherans Actually Protestant or Catholic?" And there I said, we're Catholic. Well, why did I say that? Because the idea is not actually to protest error, though error is protested. The Augsburg Confession, just as we said, I think all the way back in the first episode in the series, this document is a legal ecumenical document that was requesting permission to utilize what was formally agreed upon. That's all. And to claim with it, both in the aspect of faith as well as in the aspect of abuses, that the bishops not punish those who do good things. It wasn't even demanded that those who disagreed with them should fall in line with them. It wasn't demanded in the Augsburg Confession that the bishops start administering the blood of Christ, though they would have been well in their rights to demand that the bishops do that. All that was said was that the bishops would allow and permit us to administer the blood of Christ on the basis that Christ commanded us to, that the early church did so, that the Eastern and Oriental churches still do so, and that the idea that we cannot is invented later in time as an accretion and as a degradation of the prime and pristine faith that was handed down by the fathers in the tradition of the Holy Church. That is what Lutheranism is saying. Lutheranism, I said in last week's episode, I said then that whether one agrees with this premise or disagrees with this premise, the reality of the matter and of the fact is that Lutheranism intends to, on the basis of its own words and its own documents, to be the early church. It intends to be the tradition of the fathers. It intends to be the church of the scriptures. You look at the Augsburg Confession, you see that is obvious. You see that is obvious. you see that is obvious from the modus operandi in which it flows out of its work. Its prolegomena is, let us start with law and gospel, what God has commanded, what God has promised. Let us state that where God stated it in the scriptures, and let us see how that has been held fast to by the early church, citing church father after church father without fail on every issue. And then saying with it, it is not we who have deviated from the tradition of the Holy Church, but it is Rome who is deviating from the tradition of the early church. Not that it is we who have invented a new doctrine and said, oh, the church never knew about this truth of Holy Scripture until now, but rather we were saying, why are you pretending as though we aren't saying what the church has always been saying the entirety of time? And so we confess there is nothing that we do in practice, there is nothing that we do in ceremony, there is nothing that we believe in our faith that is contrary whatsoever to either scripture or to the Catholic Church. And you'll see in the first confession as well, the first conclusion as well, it says, or even the Church of Rome. Or even the Church of Rome. But in what sense is that? Because obviously there were many things that the Church of Rome was doing that we're not doing, many things that the Church of Rome was forbidding that we are doing. And what's the difference there? What's the division there? What's the dichotomy caused by? It's caused simply by this idea that we're referring to the traditional Church of Rome, and they are doing something else. As I said last week, it is in Rome a creative theology. But of course, that's the Rome that Melanchthon knew, the Rome that Luther knew. Is that the same Rome that we deal with today? I'm going to say no. Does that mean that Rome today is perfectly acceptable? I wouldn't say that either, but it is definitely not the same thing that our confessors were going up against at that time. We'll talk about that more, for example, when we look at the power and primacy of the Pope, and when we look at the Schmalkald articles in part 1 and 2, which we're going to do. But we'll leave it at that for now. So what's our game plan here? Our game plan is to move on to the Schmalkald articles next, then to the Formula of Concord, the Epitome, then to the power and primacy of the Pope, then to the Large Catechism, and then to the Solid Declaration, Lord willing, if we get through it all. But of course, that's working together with our existing series on working through pastoral theology from CFW Walther, as well as our series going through the book of Genesis, as well as our series in which Pastor Roland joins us and we talk about church history and deep theology, the next episode of which I believe when you see this will already have been released, which will be on the necessity of proper theological grammar for apologetics. Otherwise, it will be coming next week. As well as, for example, that little apologetic series going together with it, as well as that series on Augustine and his Enchiridion, and then, together with all the other stuff we're doing, the series on the Church Fathers, teaching through each and every one of their books, looking through Genesis in that series, all kinds of things, as well as the writing of actual books and publishing them, of which we're still in the middle of volume 2 on the commentary on the Large Catechism, for which the Creed section is done, but now work is still being completed in regard to the Large Catechism on the Lord's Prayer, and some commentaries on the Gospels and commentaries on the epistles, so on. There's always things that are going on, so it's not just that we're gonna bang out series back to back, but a lot of things happening at once. Anyways, God bless you. And yeah, I hope that this has been fruitful for you looking at the Augsburg Confession, understanding what is Lutheranism. What does it mean when we call ourselves Lutheranism or Lutherans? It means that we are evangelical Catholics who have oriented our traditional Christianity, which is conciliar, which is ecumenical in the ancient church sense, which is patristic, which is also medieval, which is also alive, which is biblical and rooted in Sola Scriptura as the only, not only people say the only ultimate infallible, no, not that, the only at all source of theology. Um, and we find ourselves rooted in these things, rooted in history, rooted in Scripture, rooted in tradition. Um, that's beautiful. And all of it subject and submitting to the gospel, to the evangelicalism of which our Catholicism sits in submission to. Anyways, God bless you. This has been the Augsburg Confession. Peace be to you.